So today we will be talking about the Battle of Chancellorsville. Now, these are the topics that we will be hitting throughout the presentation. A couple quick facts before we begin about the battle was that it lasted from April 30th to May 6th, and this was happening during the Civil War, obviously, in 1863. This battle was a victory for the Confederacy and Robert E. Lee during this time. It was famous for being the battle that mortally wounded General Thomas Jackson. The battle was fought in Spotsylvania County, which was in Virginia, and it was the Confederation led by General Robert E. Lee versus the Union Army, which was led by Joseph Hooker. Before the battle even began, there was a couple of things that were going on throughout their time. The Civil War battles beforehand were generally chaotic and very confusing. This was due to the inability to quickly speak to others. Now we have cell phones and email and all of these things that we are able to do to quickly speak to one another, but back then they didn't have that. They only had mail. Most people nowadays don't even know what mail is, but the mail it took a long time to get from one person to another, which was why there was a lot of inconsistencies during this war. Also, regiments depended on colored flags and uniforms to distinguish friend from foe. This resulted in mistaking a lot of friendlies as the enemy. The increased threat of friendly fire casualties represented a powerful disincentive to mount nighttime operations because people were afraid of shooting their own people, mistaking them as the enemy, getting confused who's on your own side and who's going against you. This is why they didn't want to do it during the night when they couldn't even see, because sometimes friendly fire even happened during the daytime, which is what happened to General Jackson. Before the war, also the Union Army was going through a lot of leadership changes. Originally, General Ambrose Burnside was leading the Union Army, but he lost the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of the past year. And they didn't like that, so they replaced him by General Joseph Hooker. Now, Hooker trained his men in hopes to win against the Confederation, obviously, but his goal was to capture Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia was the Confederation capital. If he captured Richmond, then he would be loved by everyone, and this would make the war easier for the Union to win if they had the capital. Also, Hooker had 115,000 men, which was a lot in comparison to how much Lee had, which was only 60,000 men. This was the biggest Union advantage in the Civil War because during this time, the Confederation Army was split, where half of it was serving in Southern Virginia under General James Longstreet in their own battle. Now, once the battle began, there were a few things. On April 27th of 1863, Hooker's idea was to surprise the Confederation. So he had 1/3 of his army cross the Rappahannock River. So he would sneak up behind the Confederation and have the element of surprise. Now, the other 2/3 of his army were faking a frontal assault. This was a beautiful, very clever war strategy due to the fact Lee would be focusing on the frontal assault because it was more imperative that he fight through them first. Once the fighting started on May 1st when the Federals retired back to Chancellorsville. Once Lee realized what was going on, he thought on his feet and he decided to cut his army in half. Jubal Early led 10,000 of Lee's men to hold the fort while he met with Hooker's frontal assault. The armies fought just beyond the wilderness, which was a forest west of Chancellorsville, on May 1st. Hooker had his men fall into defensive positions, even though he had the larger army. Lee's army was doing a good job. But early on May 3rd, Lee renewed his attack and decided to divide his army again to confront Major General John Sedgwick and his 6th Corps, which came in from Fredericksburg. So the Union asked for more men, and Sedgwick and the Confederation ended up in a standstill at the Salem Church. This was amazing because the Confederation had such a smaller army, but they were fighting strong. Lee then decided to split his army again to combat he sent Thomas Jackson, to attack the Union on the right. He fought with Major General Oliver Otis Howard, the 11th, and caved in the Union line. Now, once on May 5th, Hooker decided to retreat and abandoned his campaign, even though Lee had more men and had the advantage. This battle is considered to be Lee's greatest victory because it inspired him to launch a second invasion of the North. After the battle, Lee won, but it was at a cost because General Jackson was mortally injured due to friendly fire, which was already a problem before this battle even started. General Jackson was scouting the Union lines, and Confederate pickets, which were members of the 18th North Carolina Infantry, mistook his party as Northerners and shot fires into his area. Jackson was mortally wounded, and to live, they had to amputate his left arm. However, pneumonia set in, and he died 8 days after the battle. This was a crushing blow to the Confederate cause. But, fun fact, his left arm was buried by Beverly Tucker Lacey, which was Jackson's chaplain in Lexington, Virginia, while the rest of his body is buried somewhere else. This battle, its strategies went against all military conventions because it was very risky, and they didn't like that. But dividing the army was a very unusual tactic. At the time, this battle was known to be the bloodiest battle, but that title didn't last very long because it was overpassed by the Battle of Gettysburg, Chickamauga, and Spotsylvania Courthouse. The Union lost 17,200 men, which was a lot. And the Confederation had 13,000 casualties, which was actually 22% of their fighting force. And that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and I hope you know more about the Battle of Chancellorsville than you did before.